I love to travel, and recently I decided to take a trip with a travel agency to a nearby city. As I hopped on the bus, I noticed several other people on board, each with their own excitement for the journey ahead. One person that caught my eye was an elderly woman sitting in the front seat. She looked genuinely happy and content, enjoying every moment of the trip. As we explored some of the historical sites near the end of our journey, I struck up a conversation with the old lady. She was warm and friendly, and we chatted about the sights we were seeing. Time passed quickly, and I started to feel hungry. It was then that she kindly offered me a cookie she had brought with her. Without a second thought, I accepted it and took a bite. She mentioned that she worked at a pastry shop in the city center, and I saw that the cookie she handed me had these peculiar blue dots on it. While it struck me as unusual, I couldn't resist the temptation, so I continued to eat it. Oddly enough, she didn't have any herself, nor did she offer any to the other people on the bus. Back home, later that evening, something strange began to happen. I had an intense craving for that very same cookie. It was bizarre because I'm not usually one to obsess over pastries. This craving was on another level, and it was causing me distress. It was like an insatiable addiction, solely fixated on that particular cookie the old woman had given me. Desperate to understand what was going on, I tried to find the old lady's contact information in the WhatsApp group we'd been in, but she had already left. I reached out to the trip organizer, who managed to provide me with her phone number. I called her, but there was no answer. Meanwhile, I started feeling nauseous and unwell, yet the craving persisted. In excruciating pain, I decided to head to the city center to find the pastry shop where she worked. It was late at night, and most of the shops were closed. My pain was becoming unbearable, and I could hardly walk. I kept calling her phone number, and again there were no answers. I stumbled upon a pastry shop, but to my dismay, it was closed. Desperation set in, and I started calling the numbers displayed at the front of the store, only to hear a message stating that they were out of working hours. At that point, I could hardly move, and I found myself slumped against the store's glass window. My craving was consuming me entirely. It felt as if nothing else mattered except for those cookies. I struggled to stay conscious and dozed off. A few hours later, I was roused by the sound of two people conversing. One of them was expressing frustration about drug addicts while unlocking the pastry shop's door. Initially, I didn't realize they were talking about me until I caught my reflection in the shop's glass, looking disheveled and desperate, much like a drug addict. Even in that moment, all I could think about was those cookies. I can't recall how much time passed, but I saw the old lady slowly making her way towards the pastry shop. In a frenzy, I tried to stand, but I couldn't. She seemed to be expecting me, and without saying a word, she retrieved a cookie from her bag. I couldn't resist. I crawled towards her, reaching for the cookie, which fell and shattered on the ground. I began to eat the pieces from the ground, like a starving animal. There were times when I briefly regained some awareness, but it wasn't enough to regain control over my actions. I gathered every tiny fragment of the cookie from the ground and looked desperately at her for more. It was then that I noticed her eyes seemed to emit a sinister red glow. She took her gaze away from me and shifted it towards a black van that had pulled up beside the store with its side door open. She smiled and tossed another cookie inside the van. The urge to chase it overcame me. After a few seconds, I realized I was inside the van, with small blue crumbs from the cookie before me. The van was in motion, but I was utterly drained. I dozed off once more. When I opened my eyes again, I was in what seemed like a warehouse, surrounded by at least 20 other people trapped in individual cages like mine. The ground was littered with blue cookie crumbs, and the others were all screaming, incoherent and desperate, all craving that same cookie. Once more, I lost control and began to collect the crumbs from my cage and eat them. After a while, a man wearing a black hoodie entered the room, holding a cookie. The crowd started erupting with screams and cries. He broke the cookie into small pieces and fed us, I couldn't get my share, and I was once again consumed by my craving, trying to get to the crumbs farther from my cage. Days passed in this nightmarish state. I started to see lifeless bodies in the cages around me, my mind utterly fixated on the cookies. Then, one day, as I mumbled incoherently for more cookies, I saw police officers and medical personnel enter the warehouse. The man with the black hoodie who had been feeding us was arrested, and the officers began unlocking the cages one by one. We, the trapped people, and I scrambled out and began to eat the cookie crumbs scattered on the ground. Handcuffs were necessary to keep us from creating a chaos inside. They transported us to the hospital with ambulances, where I received an extensive treatment. Though it was a challenging recovery, I was grateful to be alive. After my recovery, I found out that the old woman was hired by a scientist who was working on a new substance that is 120 times more addictive than the most extreme of the available drugs. They made special cookies with that blue substance by injecting it to the normal cookies, and her task was to lure people by offering cookies. I couldn't have imagined that a simple cookie given to me by an innocent-looking old lady would lead to such an ordeal. I was on the edge of losing my life because of it, and I will never ever forget the things that happened.